They say you can't build an empire without stepping on someone. But what if I told you that Diddy's rise wasn't just business? It was blood. It was betrayal. And it never really stopped. Because from the day Biggie Smalls was taken out in 1997 to the moment Freddie P broke down on Instagram decades later, a pattern began to emerge. And it wasn't just coincidence. What if Biggie's death wasn't just a tragedy, but a chess move in a game of power? And what if the same man who threw the biggest parties was also the one pulling every emotional string from behind the scenes? In this documentary, we're connecting the dots no one ever wanted connected. Collision: the East Coast, West Coast War. Collision: the strange timing of Biggie's murder. Collision: and how Diddy went from being a survivor to a suspected puppet master. You'll hear from Napoleon, someone who lived through the war, and from Freddie P, someone who says he was groomed, used, and thrown out like trash. This isn't about music. This is about the truth behind power and what it costs to stay on top. Let's start from the beginning.
But you would have to ask a woman, right? So it's funny to me and us, we guys, we don't watch penises. But is that a joke, or is it even possible for a man to be that small? You get what I'm saying? And since I can remember, my nigga, I've been bigger than a Tootsie Roll. Since I can remember as a kid. No, for real. Like in the toilet, putting that bitch between your legs. Like, I've never been a Tootsie Roll. So I couldn't imagine what he going through. Like, you know what I'm saying? And worse than that, man, I'm not letting my daughter say no shit like that. I'm not letting my daughter say shit. My daughter? Get your ass out of here, man. And don't believe shit you hear on the internet. I'm gonna deal with this, and when I finish dealing with this, then I'm gonna come have a talk with y'all about, you know what I'm saying, how to deal with this or whatever. But let me get through this, and let me get through this without worrying about y'all. That would have been my only concern. My only concern was, like, if you have a daughter.
You heard what Napoleon said. It felt like it was even. They got somebody from us. We got somebody from their side. Those aren't the words of a man celebrating death. They're the words of a man raised in a war zone, where music wasn't just about beats and rhymes. It was about loyalty, blood, and turf. And in the middle of that war was a young, fast-moving executive named Sean Puffy Combs, the man who would later reinvent himself as Diddy. It's easy to forget now, with the colognes, clothing lines, and champagne commercials. But back then, Puff was Biggie's shadow, his business partner, his gatekeeper, and to many, his handler. When Tupac was gunned down in 1996, it shook the West Coast to its core. But Biggie's death in March 1997, that cracked open the East. 2 kings dead within 6 months. And only one man came out untouched and richer: Diddy. Candle, March 9th, 1997. Biggie is murdered in Los Angeles. 2 months later, Puff Daddy releases I'll Be Missing You, a dedication song to Big and a business move that redefined Diddy's empire overnight. The single debuts at #1 on Billboard. It stays there for 11 weeks. It wins a Grammy. It becomes the biggest selling rap song of that year, crossing over globally, emotionally, and financially. People cried. People mourned. But Diddy moved. Insiders would later whisper that Puff didn't just capitalize on the tragedy, he prepared for it. Video cassette old studio engineers claim I'll Be Missing You was already being recorded days after the murder. Briefcase, a former Uptown Records assistant, told a blog in 2004, "We were told to move fast." Puff wanted visuals, backup dancers, and a worldwide tribute. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like a campaign. And while the streets were still processing the loss of their icon, Diddy had already begun sculpting his empire out of the ashes. Let's talk numbers. Before Biggie's death, Bad Boy Records was hot, no doubt. But after it exploded. In the 12 months following Big's murder, Bad Boy inked a multi-million-dollar distribution deal. No Way Out sold over 7 million copies. Puff Daddy went from executive to artist to household name. And behind all of it was a carefully curated image. Diddy wasn't a gangster. He was a businessman, the safe mogul. But the streets weren't buying it. Because while the industry handed him trophies, fans started asking hard questions. Why did Biggie go to LA with minimal security? Why was Diddy riding in a separate car? Why was the Biggie tribute song ready so fast? And when Napoleon, someone who lived and bled beside Tupac, says on camera, it felt like balance, like it was fair. It cracks open a theory that's been buried for decades. Brain was Biggie a pawn in Diddy's rise to power? To be clear, there's no evidence Diddy orchestrated Biggie's death. But what's undeniable is how much he gained from it, and how quickly he pivoted from grief to greatness. Within 18 months of Biggie's death, Diddy was launching Sean John clothing. He was collaborating with Mariah Carey, Busta Rhymes, and even Maze. And he was being crowned as the next king of hip-hop. But here's where it gets darker. As Diddy rose, the people around him began to fall. Red Triangle pointed down Shine Barrow, Diddy's rising artist. Convicted for a club shooting in 1999. Sentenced to 10 years.
Diddy?
Acquitted.
Clean.
Red Triangle pointed down Black Rob, gave Bad Boy one of its biggest hits with Whoa. Later died broke and sick, with no major support from the label that profited off his voice. Red Triangle pointed down Craig Mack, vanished from the industry, later resurfaced in a religious cult. Each of these artists, once under Diddy's wing, found themselves discarded, disillusioned, or destroyed. The pattern was forming, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Until years later, someone finally did. Someone who was a teenager when he signed to Diddy. A kid from making the band. A voice that was never allowed to scream until now.
Wow. I never heard that. It's gonna be crazy because I guess when the trial of Keefe D, a lot of stuff is gonna probably be out. A lot of stuff probably gonna come out. A lot of hands, a lot of hidden hands, people that was involved. Eventually this stuff comes out. So I think, I believe the Keefe D story, and I'll tell you why. I believe his story because he wrote a book about it. He was arrogantly going on all these interviews saying what he was like. He was putting himself there at a murder scene. Whether Puffy had something to do with it or not, he said Puffy had something to do with it or not. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't be surprised because back then, the Puffy that we knew was a scary person. So usually scary people with money do scary things. It was years later that you started hearing that, Puffy slapping people and doing stuff like that. In our time, we never heard of that. That was unheard of, you know what I mean? So we knew that he was petrifying of Suge and Pop, no doubt about it. So, but once again, I don't know, you know what I mean?
T was never about talent. Not according to Freddy P. Not according to the broken voices echoing through empty studios and forgotten reunion tours. Because what we thought was the dream was actually the trap. And Freddy P was one of the first to say it out loud. Back in the early 2000s, Freddy was just a kid. A teen chasing a dream, trying to make it in the music industry. He wasn't prepared for what came next. He didn't sign up to be famous. He signed up to be used. And the man pulling the strings? Sean Diddy Combs. From day one on making the band, the tone was set. Domination, humiliation, and psychological control. We saw the walk for cheesecake. We saw the screaming. We saw the manipulation and called it entertainment.
But now?
It looks a lot more like conditioning. Freddy described it best. It was grooming. It was never about the music. He wasn't just talking about himself. He named others. Donity Kane, Day 26, B5, Usher, Bieber. The pattern went back decades. They sign you young. They isolate you. They break you down. And before you know it, you don't even know who you are anymore. And that's where the real control kicks in. In the same breath Freddy says it all. Before you get to the next level, you gotta do something. I can testify to that. He doesn't say what.
He doesn't have to.
Because in his voice, you hear it. The fear. The regret.
The shame.
This wasn't a bad contract. This was psychological warfare dressed in a platinum chain. Every artist he named, chewed up and left behind. Every artist Diddy launched until they spoke up. The minute they demanded rights, royalties, or respect, they vanished. Meanwhile, Diddy kept rising. He changed his name.
He danced.
He did Ciroc ads. And Freddy vanished into silence, into pain. He said he didn't want to live. He said he cried in the mirror. And no one from Bad Boy called. So when he finally spoke up, the internet listened. And the pattern got exposed. From grooming young artists to controlling their image to emotionally destroying them when they stopped obeying, the blueprint was clear. And now, people are watching. They're connecting the dots. They're realizing this wasn't about a few bad deals. This was systemic control dressed as celebrity culture. And Freddy's story was just the beginning. Because what happened next made everything worse. The money, the silence, the lawsuits, the settlements. It didn't stop with Freddy. It never does.
But like I say, man, I'm glad I escaped, man. Because when I think about it, in hindsight, he damn sure was grooming us. He took all us, he was like a sweet and sour thing. Like sometimes he make you feel bad, and he come put the arm around you, you know. And when you look at his pattern of behavior, JD, all them boys, this is what they was doing, signing kids, B2K, all them niggas.
He says it like a man who just got out of something alive. Freddy didn't need to scream. He just looked into the camera, nodded, and said it. I escaped. And that one sentence cracked the final illusion. Because now, the empire Diddy built on control, charisma, and contracts is falling apart from the inside. One voice became 2, then 10, then undeniable. And behind each new allegation, the blueprint looked eerily familiar. Recruit them young. Separate them from their families. Make them believe you're their only path. And then, break them. Just enough to rebuild them in your image. What started with Biggie's death became a formula. And Freddie P was one of the lucky ones. Because while he carries the trauma, at least he still has a voice. Others? Still silent. Some signed NDAs. Some were paid off. Some disappeared completely. But the pattern never stopped. It just evolved. File folder Donity Kane split, discarded. File folder Day 26, charted, then ghosted. File folder B5 vanished. File folder Usher, allegedly sent away at 14. File folder Justin Bieber, raised around the empire. File folder Cassie, settled out of court. File folder Keith D, now pointing fingers in murder trials. Each story different. Each detail damning. Each silence deafening. And now, even the industry is shifting. People who once clapped at Diddy's speeches are closing their mouths. People who once danced at his parties are deleting photos.
Why?
Because the smoke is no longer just smoke. It's fire. And it's touching everything. Chart decreasing Diddy's Revolt connections? Pulled. Chart decreasing event appearances? Cancelled. Chart decreasing partnerships? Under review. Chart decreasing public trust? Burned. Because once the stories line up, the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. And when Freddy P, the kid who was groomed and left for dead by the same man the world once called a mogul, says, I escaped, you listen. Because you realize that behind every empire is someone trying to run from the truth. And eventually, the truth runs faster. They tried to bury it in old contracts. They tried to silence it with private settlements. They tried to spin it with branding, champagne, and sequins. But the cracks are showing. The clips are leaking. The artists are remembering. And that story you thought was about hip-hop was about power. This isn't about a scandal. It's about a system. And now that system is collapsing in front of the very audience it once fooled. Will Diddy survive this? Legally? Maybe. Financially?
Possibly.
But publicly? He's already lost the one thing he always controlled, the narrative. And no amount of rebranding will change that. Because while Diddy walks free, the secrets stay. So now that you've seen the truth, the real timeline, the voices they tried to silence, the blueprint no one wanted to admit existed, the question becomes, what do you believe? Was this karma? Or was someone pulling strings from the very beginning? Because we started with Biggie's death and ended with an entire generation of artists left broken, abandoned, and afraid to speak. This wasn't just a feud. It wasn't just bad business. It was a system, and it operated in plain sight for over 2 decades. The labels knew. The executives knew. Some of the artists even knew, but they stayed quiet, either out of fear or because silence was the price of survival. Now people like Freddy P are finally speaking. And if you're listening, really listening, then this story doesn't end here. Because more names are coming, more clips will surface, and more of that empire will crumble. Microphone, drop a comment. Do you think Diddy should be held accountable? Or is this just a case of old enemies trying to rewrite history? Thumbs up like this video if you felt the weight of the voices that were never heard. Bell subscribe to this channel because we're not done yet, not even close. We've got the footage, we've got the timelines, and we've got the next chapter loading. This was Diddy's Empire Exposed, from Biggie's revenge to Freddy P's breakdown. And you just witnessed the beginning of the unraveling.
Stay locked in.